What do I need to be good at to be great at something?
Hello, everyone. You are listening to She Leads with Carly, and in this show, we talk to the absolute best, brightest, and yes, badass leaders.
Tap into where your natural curiosity takes you. Just making sure you're not your own roadblock. Even if you do fall, you're going to fall and you're going to learn.
Together, let's build a DNA of what it takes to rise to the top and truly make an impact. I'm your host, Carly Malatsky. Hello, everyone. I am incredibly excited to welcome our guest today, Olivia Kory. Olivia is the head of operations and strategy at Haus, a decision science platform who helps brands make informed investment decisions. Prior to Haus, Olivia led growth marketing at Sonos, Netflix, and Quibi, a startup who created a short-form streaming platform that generated content viewing on mobile devices. We've actually already talked about the Quibi story a bit on the pod before, but it is a perfect story emulating the risks that naturally come with joining any startup, as you will soon learn again. Before going into marketing, Olivia worked in the advertising space and worked for an AdsTech startup called TubeMogul, where she joined as the 100th employee. She saw the company grow to about 500 people and get acquired by Adobe shortly thereafter for approximately $540 million. Olivia also received her bachelor's in English literature and language from the University of Michigan. Special shout out to Stephen Greitzer and Alex Nagurney for sending over some questions and insights prior to the show. Olivia, it is so great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining. How are you today?
Thank you for having me, Carly. I'm so excited to chat. I'm doing great.
Of course. So first, what I love to do is set the scene. Where are you in the world? What are you up to? Are you working from home, in the office? What's the situation?
Yeah, I am working remote from suburban Michigan, suburban Detroit, a town called Bloomfield Hills, where I grew up. And we were in LA for about 7 years. COVID hit, Quibi went down, which we'll talk about, and we were compelled to move back to where we grew up, and so live in a very suburban life now. It's different. Miss California, but it's been good.
Yeah. Okay. I guess it's a perfect segue. So tell me about your childhood. Tell me about, 5-10-year-old Olivia. I believe you grew up in Michigan. What was that like? What was exciting to you? Who was inspiring you?
Yeah. So grew up here, and I'd say I grew up with 2 older brothers, which explains a lot of it. I was obsessed with sports. Like when I think about my childhood, I can't really think of much else other than sports. And at my wedding, my friends talked about how like they would go to the ice arena for like figure skating, and they would see me in the rink next door, like playing hockey with all the boys. And I think like, some of my parents' friends still talk about how like, do you still know every single player who's ever played for the Detroit Red Wings and you can name their number?
Wow.
And I can't anymore. Kind of grew out of it a bit in high school and college, but like very competitive. And I think that kind of stuck with me through my professional career as well.
Yeah. And from my understanding, you actually wanted to be a sports broadcaster for a good amount of time. Did this actually go up until even through University of Michigan, or where did that almost alter?
Yeah, so it's part of the reason why I studied English lit and language at U of M. They didn't have a journalism school. So studied English, loved to read, loved to write, wanted to be a sportscaster, like saw the woman on TV interviewing Tom Brady on the sidelines and was like I feel like I'd be really good at that. And I actually got an internship, my first internship between my junior and senior year at the local news station, like Channel 4 in Detroit on the sports desk, which is like a dream, And as I was doing it, I was learning more about what it would really take to do that and to have that type of job. And I think in front of the camera, there was a lot I learned about, like, there's a lot of kind of superficiality about that I wasn't really excited about. And then behind the camera, if you don't want to be the face of it, which I decided I didn't, it was something I just don't think I was prepared for. behind the camera is like a lot of AV production, video editing, which I also was like not sure about. And so I actually decided after that internship that it was not something I wanted to pursue. And the other piece of it, I was like very social. I wanted to be around my friends. And in doing that internship, I learned that you kind of have to move to like an obscure local, like Oklahoma to get started in that industry. You have to work the graveyard shift, like the weekends, like 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. or 11, which is the shift I was working in my internship. And for better or for worse, I think I just wanted to have a more typical post-college experience in Chicago and New York with my friends that I had made. And so I didn't actually do it. And I think often about that, like sometimes a hobby is best left a hobby.
Yeah.
And that you can still enjoy it in that way, and that you don't always need to kind of pursue that as the career that you want if it's not something that you're feeling passionate about.
Right. Because even listening to you, right, there's a difference of having passion about sports and watching the teams play, knowing the players, all about that, versus saying, you know, being in the spotlight in front of a camera. Like seems like a very different world. And not only that, it's also the power of internships in a way. You got a really small taste of what that industry could look like, and it actually, you know, really changed your trajectory, which is pretty fascinating.
Totally.
And did that change how you thought of navigating the University of Michigan and studying English Lit? Because it seems like you chose that major for that reason, or did you just say, look, I'm passionate about this. We'll see where my career takes me after?
Yeah, I remember my senior year, and even I would say the latter half of college to some extent, I really optimized for just classes I enjoyed. And I think about this now, like if I were going through school, I probably would not have majored in English Lit. I probably would have done math or computer science. So maybe it was just being young and naive and being surrounded by friends who were also pursuing liberal arts. But like, we just kind of, I think collectively decided to just take classes that we wanted to go to, and that like didn't feel like work and like burdensome to wake up early in the morning and get to. So took a lot of like writing classes, a lot of you know, I remember taking a class on like medieval literature, which is just something that, you know, I found to be interesting in the moment. So yeah, that's what I was optimizing for. And I was also, I think, I look back on it and I realize like a lot of college is the network that you build. And I think that's okay. And that's okay to sometimes admit that a lot of what's important about going to a school like that is the people you meet along the way.
Yeah. And you mentioned, now that I remember, you mentioned the importance of mentors throughout your career. Talk to me a little bit about that. How have you approached either finding mentors, keeping them, managing that relationship? What does that look like to you to have mentors?
Yeah, I can't pinpoint what it is that I did or like how I got so lucky, but everywhere I've been, from my internships through to Starcom, TubeMogul, Netflix, Sonos, like I have had the most incredible bosses, the most incredible mentors. And I also think about this now in terms of like advice for people coming up entry level is that it's a lot of work to train someone with no skills. Like I think about that now as I'm kind of busier in my career of like, that's an investment that you should not take for granted. And I think sometimes folks like, you know, paying their dues right out of school, perhaps think they might be entitled to the promotion very quickly, but it's like, actually like you really, and I owe so much to the people who took the time to sit with me and train me and show me how to do these, you know, pivot tables and whatnot in Excel very early on. And maybe it was just the passion I exuded or the curiosity, but my bosses in every job I've been at have just been like transformative in terms of my career and what they were able to unlock for me and my potential.
Now that you're on almost the other side of it, right? And you're the mentor and you're helping these young professionals almost come up and learn, what do you see that's missing beyond the entitlement that I think you're spot on about? But what else do you see that these young professionals can actually embody when they are going into a new role?
I think just like embrace the grunt work, if you will. Like it's very temporary, and don't get discouraged if you don't enjoy your job. I do think about this a little bit. Like think part of the reason it was so fun early on is because you were in person in the office. And I think it must be very challenging, like coming out of school in a remote job, not having like the water cooler, the fun of going to get drinks after work or going out to dinner. Like I imagine that's more difficult to stay motivated. And so I feel a sense of empathy for folks who are like coming out of school and just kind of in this remote Zoom environment.
Yeah.
But everything is temporary. And like, I promise that the work gets more interesting and it gets more strategic. And like the early days are for building those skill sets and for really like no task beneath you is the common I see in people who have been successful coming up. And like one other thing I did in college in the summers was I worked retail, and like my parents kind of instilled that in me of like everyone should have a retail job in their life. So I worked at a grocery store. I was like cashier and bagging groceries, and like it really changes the way I thought about customer service and like also the way you want to behave when you're in that type of situation to the person on the other end.
Yeah.
And it just creates an empathy that I don't think like you can have if you haven't done a job like that. So
Amazing.
That's just that I stick with me.
I love that. That's great. Okay. So walk me through your first job out of college. You decide to go into the advertising space. And as I mentioned in the intro, you went to TubeMogul. Walk me through that experience. What attracted you to advertising? And also, were you thinking, you know what, I found it. This is where I'm going to be. Obviously, you end up pivoting, but how are you thinking of it at that stage?
Yeah. So after school, I got an internship in Chicago. Interestingly enough, like the department I was in at this big ad agency was product placement, which was like helping to find integrations for like BlackBerry was our client. For BlackBerry, where like you see the phone and Gossip Girl or whatever those shows are.
Yeah.
I remember we had like an integration between Walgreens and Celebrity Apprentice before Trump became Trump. And so that was my first exposure. I loved it. I like couldn't believe that this was a job.
Wow.
It was my first really foray into marketing. It felt fun. Like it didn't feel like work. And so I ended up getting an offer from that agency. One learning there is like, I remember, and I think Alex actually talked about this on the podcast, is like, ask a lot of questions. Like I remember sitting at my desk working on something called OLV, and like I was managing a campaign called OLV. Yeah. I remember Googling it and like nothing came up because it was kind of obscure in terms of advertising. It actually means online video, like YouTube, and it's like a channel that advertisers buy. I remember not knowing what I was buying for like weeks. And so this is just like a lesson I took with me is like, no question is stupid. Like just ask the question, get it out of the way. Don't sit there wondering how it's going to sound. But it was my early career. And I was very lucky to get approached by Jeremy Bloom, who was running TubeMogul's Midwest office at the time. They were really starting to take hold. Like they weren't the number one player in the market. And the company and the product was like making advertising transactional via biddable marketplaces versus like having to pick up the phone and call someone to buy an ad spot in some TV show or online on YouTube. So they were really disrupting the market in terms of like kind of transacting in this more biddable environment, a la the stock market. But they weren't the number one player. Like they weren't the most well-known. They were just starting to take hold. And he offered me the job. And like, all I can really look back on and think about there is that the people I talked to were awesome. Like really amazing group of people that was assembled that I knew I could learn from. The product wasn't yet proven, but took a chance and it paid off for sure. TubeMogul ended up, I'd say, becoming a big leader. They grew from, I think I joined around 100 people. They grew to about 500 over the time I was there. I was able to move out to LA as part of a promotion and lead the customer success team out there. It was my first foray into startups, and I think it was an amazing experience.
And so I'm going to backtrack a bit. You mentioned even the part about asking questions. And I remember Alex mentioning the bear hug and her own story about that. And do you have any almost tangible tips for people, and this is actually almost any age when they're entering a new environment, I would say, probably more so towards these early professionals, but in any new environment, it's still challenging, or at least hard to say, you know what, I'm going to ask the question that probably everyone knows the answer to, but I'm new, so I don't. Do you have any tips or tricks that maybe mental mind games, whatever it may be, that help you?
Yeah, I always like it when folks are resourceful. Like first, like Google it, like see what you can and can't find. But then like their one-on-ones are a great forum of just like, I love it when people bring questions to the one-on-one, big or small. And like that just exuding curiosity is like all you want to see as
Yeah.
a leader. And like there is no stupid question, no dumb question. Like that's what the one-on-one time is for. And I love it. Like it's my favorite one-on-one when they like when someone on the team asks a question and then it's becomes an opportunity to kind of teach and coach. I think that is it's there's just no example where I'm like, this is a dumb. I can't think of anything that's kind of straight in that territory.
Okay, great. And so you mentioned you saw growth for TubeMogul from 100 to 500 people. And it was almost like you said, your first taste of a startup. What was that experience like almost navigating your career afterwards? Were you more of, okay, startups are exciting? You even, after you left, you saw they got acquired by Adobe, this huge acquisition. Were you like, okay, there's something there about startups that maybe I have to stick to? Or how are you navigating the next stage of your career?
Yeah, I look back and like try to figure out what was very special about that company and like culture. I can't say it enough. And I actually caught up with the former CEO of TubeMogul, Brad, who now runs a VC fund. And I was like asking him some questions as I'm starting off. We're early stage startup at Haus. Like, how did you do that? Like, how did you build a culture where everybody just wanted to do their best work and be, I think, really like there forever. Like nobody ever wanted to leave. The attrition was low. In a world where like it was not an easy job. I think we were pioneering a very new technology, and that always comes with challenges. So, like, how did you do it? I remember him saying recently, like, you need to like know who you are and build culture around that. And he said him and his co-founder John were like underdogs from the Midwest. They were kind of the ones who were labeled as like awesome nobodies by the board. Like just that's what they said about them.
Wow.
I think as a result, they like were just completely egoless and really scrappy in problem solving. And they built a culture around that. And then they hired and fired and promoted people based on that culture. And that's the part where he said is like parenting, where it's like, it's not what you say, it's what you do. And it's how you act. And that's something that I think and I certainly am like learning into of like, what is uniquely me? What is uniquely Zach, my founder?
Yeah.
And how do we build a culture around that and make it authentic?
Wow. So this is super fascinating because then you work at Netflix for many years, and Netflix is known to have an amazing culture, right? I talked about it with Alex. I've talked about it on the pod before. How do you play the two together? Is it the same type of, okay, because of Netflix and TubeMogul, I've now seen this is what makes a great culture? Or have you learned different aspects of what can be a great culture from the two experiences?
Yeah, I think that the commonality between the two is that they kind of hire, fire, promote people based on their values.
Okay.
Like it is a values driven culture. I think those are, very, very similar. The culture at Netflix is very unique in every other way, very radical. I know folks have talked about it on the pod, so I won't talk about it too much, but like it is just going into that was unlike anything I could have ever expected or imagined. And I'm sure you've heard about the culture deck. I would recommend to anybody, Google like Netflix culture deck. They have an archive version of the original one. And just this way of operating where like everything is out in the open. Like I think there's a section on gossip. Like we don't say things behind people's backs that we wouldn't say to their face.
Wow.
And so I remember just being so struck by like the 360s is like their feedback cycle where our bosses and like everyone in our reporting structure or line would share their feedback that they got and that they gave. And we would see it And it makes you want to give like very helpful feedback when it's coming from a place of good. It's wanting folks to improve, and it's really done with positive intent. But like there would be a moment in the office where someone would pull you aside after a meeting, say like, "Hey, feedback on this meeting. I feel like you threw me under the bus in that discussion, and here's this, and this in terms of feedback and the way you approached it." It's very radical. Like I don't think a lot of companies operate that way. And I also remember like there was a document about the structure in the marketing org going from global to regional and back to global. I remember the CEO leaving a comment saying like, "I don't think we'll need regional teams a year from now." And the whole regional team was reading it. It was like very out in the open. It was my first lesson about like, hey, everyone's replaceable. And I just loved that like the things that were happening behind closed doors were just very much transparent and out in the open. And they treated people like adults with that information. One other thing that has gotten a really mixed reviews over the years, and I'd say is very polarizing, is like when you let someone go, you'd send an email to the whole department about why you let them go, so that people aren't. And I think this is something that you tend to experience in companies where like someone just kind of disappears, and then people kind of talk about why they disappeared and what happened and speculate.
Wow.
And so that was very polarizing. Like I don't know if they still do it. I remember getting kind of mixed feedback, but these are the aspects of this kind of like radical candor culture that made it really unique and unlike anything I've ever seen.
Do you think there's a level of having to develop this thick skin because of this radical candor that people maybe struggle with or have to learn, and there's a learning curve about that?
Yeah, it's a learning curve for sure. I remember the first time the 360s came out, I was like up until midnight waiting for it. And I remember reading through it 3-4 times. And the first time you kind of need like a glass of wine to wash it down. And then it starts to get fun. And I don't know, maybe it's culty in that way, but it gets fun because that was the most helpful feedback I've ever gotten in my career, and like took me just completely transformed my career in terms of the way I was able to lead and to operate. It was feedback that without it, I don't know if I'd be where I am today.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think also playing sports at that young age, something that I can at least see from myself, is that's actually taught me what, like being able to take in feedback, negative, positive, any type of feedback, but actually welcoming it and seeing, you know what, I've had this before since I was 5 years old, just getting feedback. And I don't know, have you seen that parallel for you?
Yeah, absolutely. You start to crave it. You're like, I want to get better. I want to improve. And you kind of start to feel yourself stagnate when you're not getting that feedback.
I love that.
Good and bad.
Okay, so take me now. This is when you actually really pivoted into marketing. So before we even get into that, tell me, what is marketing? If you could distill it down, what is marketing and what makes a strong leader in marketing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I have potentially a hot, spicy take on this, but like one of the most important aspects of marketing is kind of admitting that you don't have all the answers. And like, I think what marketing is for me is just constant experimentation and developing hypotheses, testing hypotheses, and actioning and making it iterative. I think the worst marketers are the ones stuck in their own ways who have a playbook that they constantly run. And I think like, this potentially might be controversial, but there's brand marketing, there's performance marketing. I think typically brand marketing is like your upper funnel TV ads. Your Super Bowl ad is like the quintessential brand marketing campaign. It's all your PR and the press you get in the trades. It's your social media presence. And then there's performance marketing, which is kind of on the other side, more scientific, really focused on like Facebook ads and Google ads and lower funnel, like, trying to get people to buy something. And it's like, there shouldn't really be a divide there. Like these are two things. And I think the best marketers are balancing and understanding that you need both. Like what is brand marketing in a world where most people are not even watching TV anymore and they're on Meta and they're on Google and TikTok all day long. And so at least in my mind, like the best marketers I've worked with have understood how to kind of delicately balance that line between what is brand and what is performance, and they don't take too strong of a stance in one direction or the other. So that's one thing I'd say: constantly experimenting, admitting that you potentially don't have all the answers, and then like customer obsession, like knowing your customer in and out. You cannot be successful without doing that work.
And going off of the first one, right, where not sticking to a playbook, being able to change and iterate and move differently. Have you seen that with these new advancements in technology, whether it's AI, generative AI, whatever it may be, everything's shifting and it's touching almost different points? Have you noticed that there are some that maybe love to stick to a plan? They've actually fallen behind, or it's been a huge struggle to say like, oh, we have to shift, but I don't know how or what that looks like?
Yeah, I see it every day. And the most common example of this is the way advertising has been bought previously is like, you actually, in agencies, kind of make their living on like being in these platforms, Meta, Google, YouTube, wherever they are, like, and making like really kind of micro hands-on optimizations and moving budgets around. And like the way these products are moving is becoming entirely automated. Like Google, Meta, like all the big ad platforms have created algorithmic based like AI solutions where you don't need to touch the wheel. Like you really, like they're going to beat you 99% of the time.
Yeah.
And you can see like it would really benefit everyone. There's a lot of like a very healthy distrust of the algorithms, I would say. And maybe you do need to validate like what you're actually getting from these black boxes. But like all in all, net, I'd say it's a good thing. And it would actually mean you can do more with less. Like you don't need big teams. Like you want to get lean, you want to get fit. This is actually a good thing for you. And like, we should embrace it. But I'm seeing a lot of people fighting it.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because you're talking about through the marketing lens. And yet what I hear at work all the time and what I've seen with young startups and young founders is the same can actually be applied. You know, everything you can do, you can build an MVP, you can build a V0 with, you know, much fewer employees now and with a smaller team and get to the same results. So anyway, I find it super fascinating just drawing that parallel. But okay, Olivia, I want you to walk me through or at least reflect on your Quibi experience. How do you view that? What comes to mind when you think of those 2 years or however long you had that experience for?
Yeah, so head of growth at Netflix went over to Quibi to run growth there and brought me with, and Alex and Steven was on my team. So amazing group of talent like that I think will never kind of be assembled again. And the lessons and what I learned. There's so much here. I could say a lot.
A whole podcast just in that.
The whole podcast, but I think the big thing I learned is that you always are operating in the state of fear of like, what is the worst that can happen? Like, you know, I'm going to lose my job or the company is going to shut down. Like these are the worst possible outcomes in terms of in the spectrum. And like, usually nothing like that ever happens. Like usually it's like, oh, a presentation doesn't go well. And so like in this case, the worst thing that could possibly happen happened and it was totally fine. And so it changes your risk profile a bit in that way where it's like, you know, Meg is the ambassador to Kenya now in the Biden administration. Like everyone's doing fine. We all learned so much, I would say. Like it was a crash course MBA in business. And I actually think part of the thesis of Quibi was right. Like I think short form content, video content on your phone did blow up during the pandemic. It was just on TikTok and like in execution, it ended up being slightly different in terms of the recipe that worked and the recipe that was successful. But the thesis was there. Execution perhaps wasn't. We learned so much and like the worst possible outcome happened, the worst case, and we are all better off for it. We all learned, we all look back on the experience fondly and talk about it all the time of like, it was cut short. And like, we go back and do it again. So that's just changed my appetite for risk where it's like, how bad could it be? And now I've seen how bad it can be and it wasn't that bad.
Right. You got through it. You all got through it. Wow. And if you could go back and change one or two things and do them differently from a marketing perspective at Quibi, what would they be?
That's a tough question because I think the business model made it such that we were really challenged on what we could do and what we couldn't. What we did was we did a massive pre-launch, hundreds of millions of dollars in ad spend, pre-launch, pre-product to get people excited. We bought a Super Bowl ad. I think we were the first startup, like pre-product, to ever buy a Super Bowl ad.
Oh, wow.
But the business required that. Like, that's the part that's not talked about, is that the content is so expensive that like we needed to be massively successful out of the gates in order to have a chance. And so in a normal startup, I would probably have started small, almost no marketing spend in the beginning, iterated our way into product market fit, and then really dialed up the marketing, and then in the situation we were in, we didn't have that kind of time. Like, we needed to launch big given the cost of the content. So I obviously wouldn't have done that, but I understand why we did. And I think that it was the best we could do with what we had available. Marketing wise, I think this is also where being customer obsessed comes in, where it's like, who were we really marketing to was always a question, in terms of the content that we developed and the marketing that we put out and the PR we sought. Like, was it millennials or was it a little bit different? And I think, really never really honed in on exactly who we made Quibi for, which is like big learning. Like, who is your ICP? And you got to get really, really dialed in there.
And who does that fall under? I don't imagine it, new hires, marketing. I guess it is such a small startup that really anyone, but who do you attribute that to? The founder saying, this is who we're targeting, or more so the ones on the ground talking to customers, realizing this is who it's for? How do you think through that?
Yeah, I think it's everyone.
Everyone.
It is everyone. I would say the content team developing the content needs to understand this, the marketing team and the product team. And usually, like, how that works is you do a lot of user feedback group sessions, which we did. But I think it's really hard when you're pre-product. I think, like, when you ask someone pre-product to describe what they want, they will describe something they already know and love. And that's what you get a lot in user research. I remember, like, basically what they described back to us was Netflix. And so in that way, it's just really hard to do that kind of user research pre-product. Now at Haus, like, we have a product, we have users, and like, I can just set up time and watch them use it and see where they potentially are leaning in and what's not is helpful. And so without that, I think we were kind of like had our hands tied behind our back. So I don't attribute that to like, that was someone's job that got missed. Like, the research was done, the work was done. It was just a little bit early.
Got it. And before we even get into Haus, and obviously that transition to ops and strategy, when you mentioned your risk profile has changed a bit from that Quibi experience. Have you ever considered yourself to say, you know what, I'm going to go start my own thing? I know that if the worst happens, it's okay.
Yeah. It's funny. I joined Haus about a year in. It was founded in 2021. I joined in 2022, and I talked to Zach a lot about the early days. And part of me is like, it sounds so hard, and it almost has discouraged me from wanting to start my own thing. I think with the right group of people, like, who you can lean on and who complement each other well, it's something I'm absolutely interested in. I think being a solo founder would be tough. I think it would be really, really hard. And I think getting something off the ground and assembling that team that early is just so often overlooked and underappreciated and undervalued in the world of startup.
So walk me a bit through the decision to go to Haus. And not only that, was there ever a feeling of imposter syndrome saying, you know what, not only am I going to lead at Haus, but I'm also actually leading in, operations and strategy, maybe a bit different than what I'm used to and what you've done in years prior?
Yeah. So in terms of the role, I'll answer the last part first.
Yeah.
what I found that it's all reps. Like I remember when I first started, I'm doing a little bit of everything right now. I was really intimidated by sales. And then I've done now enough sales meetings that it's easy and it's exciting and fun. I think it's all about reps. Like I also remember the first time we accidentally missed payroll due to an issue in our payroll system. Like that will never happen again. Like, and I know it now. And so with a lot of this, it's like fear of the unknown. Once you do it a few times, it really starts to become really, really comfortable. And that's how I'm feeling right now, where it's a lot of this stuff early days was quite daunting. And you kind of, it's like riding a bike, you pick it up quick.
Yeah.
And Haus. So my Haus story really begins at Netflix. I'll give just a bit on what that means of like the growth marketing kind of operation that we stood up at Netflix was really sophisticated. They wanted the marketing to work more like a product org. In that way, it was like heavy focus on automation to your, like we talked about AI and like really leaning into that, more algorithmic media buying. And then a third kind of key tenet being experiments and constantly running these really well-designed, clean experiments all over the world. We had a really clear understanding of what different marketing activities were delivering to the business in a world where like tons of noise and organic demand and really kind of hard to parse out what these things were doing. But the reason they were able to do that is because they had a very large data science team kind of dedicated to standing that up. And so what we're trying to do is like bring the scientific method, like for some reason it hasn't really proliferated marketing and advertising, but like think like randomized control trials in pharma.
Right.
Like we're trying to bring that to marketing. And historically, like only the Netflix and the Ubers and the Airbnbs of the world have had the resources and the teams to do this stuff. And so we're trying to do that as SaaS. We're like, if you want to run more experiments, really high quality, like scientifically rigorous tests in the world of marketing, we automate that whole process, make it really easy so that someone like me without a stats background or an analytics background can run like really high quality experimentation and get really like clean results and real results versus some of like the kind of magic solutions that are out there in marketing today, which people really, really tend to distrust in the industry.
So, and you're very much, as you mentioned, this is very much a data-driven world. You are now in the thick of it, and you're talking to data science, economists, everyone that kind of can contribute to these data-informed decisions. What advice do you have for those who maybe don't have these qualifications, but they do want to enter it and they do want to have this analytical mindset?
I would say just even if it's you're in kind of an ancillary role like me in the marketing realm of a tech startup, start there and like you will get enough exposure to people in different parts of the organization cross-functionally that like you'll be able to do anything you want. Like if you're curious and you're passionate, you'll be able to move around, but like start small, like start in a department like marketing or in customer success or in sales where perhaps you don't need that level of technical knowledge and rigor. And then you'll get exposure through your job to enough folks that if that is a path you want to take, like I know so many people from TubeMogul who started off in account management, customer service, who then moved their way into application engineering. That was a very common path.
Wow.
Or into product as a PM. So I'd say like, you know, if you're curious and you care, like the movement in these startups is really common and really flexible, and kind of what makes it fun to be a part of it is that you can do so many things.
Yeah. And it's similar to what you said, almost getting those reps in and talking to people, almost treating reps as conversations or calls or whatever it may be, which is super, super interesting and tangible, which is great. So I'm curious, have you ever had a test that has been performed that reveals some type of data that can inform your decision, but leadership of Haus or wherever can actually say, no, we're still not going to do that, even though the data suggests it? Have you ever had that?
Yeah, we see that all the time. And this is where I say the quality that I admire most in marketing leaders, or the willingness to experiment, potentially be wrong. Like this was also really is indoctrinated into this at Netflix, where like even the CEO would opt his ideas into an experiment before we roll them out. Like he would do the process of like running the test and seeing the results. And a really common example is Google brand search. So usually historically a big bulk of performance marketing budgets are on Google search, where search for a product, you search for Netflix, you get an ad on top, and then you get their organic listing.
Right.
And everyone is buying their terms, a way to kind of protect their brand, if you will. And like we see often that you don't need to be buying your terms. Like if someone is searching for Netflix, they're going to find Netflix. Like there's intent there where like they're looking for you and they will find you. And so you don't need to bid on the term or pay for that ad. And so this is, again, like huge area investment. Google built their business on search advertising. If you actually run the incrementality test, which is scientific method, control expose, we create a universe of people kind of undistinguishable from another universe in terms of comparability. But the only difference is they're not getting those ads. And then we look at the difference of the treatment over the control, the group who didn't get the ads. Often we see it's not doing anything for the business. And like brands are investing hundreds of millions of dollars in this channel.
Wow. And
sometimes it does work. I don't want to say like blanket it doesn't, but it's just become such a part of marketing and how we think about it. And it's so ubiquitous that like they'll retest and retest and retest, and we get the same result every single time before they start to turn it down. And some end up just kind of turning it down, but not fully off. But we've been able to make some like really major kind of strategic reallocations that have driven like really significant outcomes as a result.
Wow.
Just one example.
Yeah, no, that's great. And is there a level of almost having to convince leadership, being like, look, the numbers here, we've run many tests and they come with the same result? Like, is there the sense of frustration there? Like, how do you navigate that?
I think it's fun. I think having data, like this is why we created Haus, is like the company we wanted to recommend. We're like, everything we're reporting on is like observable in a business's own data. So it's like really hard to argue with. And the more times you run a test and get a result, the more your certainty increases. And so you can be 90% certain or 99% certain. And then you have the data point you need to like make that decision. So it is, I think it's fun. I think it's like a culture shift in the organization where like we're providing the tools and the resources to actually have the evidence that you need to like move confidently one way or another.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, Olivia, we're going to go more to fun questions, if you will. But first, what's your hottest take?
Oh, my hottest take. I could stake in marketing here, but I think for fun and in the spirit of levity, I will say, I was just talking to Steven about this recently. I think espresso martinis are a perfectly acceptable breakfast drink versus evening. And I have had it at brunch and I get a lot of crap from my friends. And so I just want to say that I'm here for them as breakfast, and I think that's okay.
I love it. I'm very glad you said that. I think that makes sense. Okay, next one is, what have you actually changed your mind about over the past decade, 10 years, 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, this is a good one. I'm also going to go kind of lighthearted for this one as well. Coming from Netflix, I believed through and through in the binge model of like release all episodes at once. And I've been watching some of these shows recently, and I realized how much I miss the week to week experience of episodic content release and how much it can be, and like really how community driven it can be in terms of talking to people about it. Like Succession was a recent example. The Bear just dropped all the episodes at once. And I was like, oh, I kind of wish they released this week to week, because I'm talking to everybody about it. And it'd be really good to have that conversation more often with my friends and my community. So I've changed my mind on this. I used to be kind of through and through believer in the binge model, and I've totally switched my take.
From a Netflix perspective or any of streaming service, what actually is the motivation to say we're going to use the binge model and release it all, and then people can be done with it in a weekend? What is the purpose?
It's all about consumer choice.
Okay.
It's all about consumer choice. You choose the way in which you want to experience the content. Like, why should we limit you or restrict you?
Is there not a component to almost, like you said, like dragging it out and saying like they'll be talking about Bear for longer if it's released weekly? Does that come into it?
Yeah, I think there are certain shows, like the top 1% to 5% of prestige TV, I think should be experienced in that way. I think this is my if any Netflix execs are listening, like I need to rethink it. Like, I was with you, I believed in it. strongly to my core. And the way I've experienced TV recently, my favorite viewing experiences are like White Lotus, Succession, Game of Thrones, 1, 2, and 3.
Yep.
And those are all week to week.
And you think it depends on the show, or just in general, the binge model should be kind of scrapped?
I think for good shows, it should be that.
Okay. I didn't anticipate going so deeply into this, but it's fascinating to me. So I love it.
Yeah. I think like prestige TV, when you know you've got something that people will talk about, I think you should consider it.
Sounds good. Okay. Last question. Olivia, what's your superpower?
Yeah, I was thinking about this one before the call, and like, I don't have a great answer. I think if anything, it is my ability to bring people together. I think like I was always the captain of our kickball team and kind of the coach there. And I've introduced a lot of my friends who have then gotten married. And so I think like kind of creating that community and like the ability to rally a team, bring people together to kind of rally around a shared goal is something I'm uniquely kind of good at. And then also just like caring and kind of giving a shit, I think is something that really helped me get to where I am. I think a lot of people are kind of going through the motions, especially in their professional life. And it's like, I genuinely care about kind of every test that I run at Haus right now and kind of geek out over it. So I think those are maybe 1 and 2.
I love that. That's perfect. Yeah, that's great. Okay, Olivia, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I absolutely loved it, and it's such a pleasure to talk to you.
So fun. Could talk for hours.
Thank you so much for listening to the show this week. If you enjoyed, please spread the word. Tell someone about She Leads or post about it on social media and tag us. If you want to contact us, feel free to send over a message through the She Leads Instagram page at sheleads.show. If you want to follow us on Twitter, our account is at SheLeadsShow, and mine is at Carly Malatsky. This episode was produced and edited by Nick Furshow. Thank you also to our partner, Floodgate. If you're passionate about startups and want to learn more about the starting journey of those who have built groundbreaking companies, I highly recommend listening to Starting Greatness with Mike Maples Jr., the founding partner of Floodgate. He has an incredible show that, in my opinion, is definitely worth your time. Thanks again.